This is Daniel Lieberman,
author and professor at Harvard University.
Exercise,
disease, sleep, nutrition.
He has the answers on all of those things that most of us care about.
On the Diary of a CEO podcast, he revealed the 7 biggest lies about exercise, sleep, running, cancer, and sugar. However, this podcast is very long, so let me save you an hour and 29 minutes by explaining everything he says in only 15 minutes. Without further ado, let's stash these secrets into the vault. Firstly, what are the biggest myths in exercise? The first myth is that you need to sleep 8 hours every single day.
TV and lights and our phones and all these things are preventing us from sleeping. Edison destroyed sleep, right?
However, when researchers conducted sleep studies on people who didn't have these technological distractions, they found something shocking.
So when you put sensors on people who don't have any electricity, they don't have TVs, and they don't have phones, and they don't have any of these gadgetry, right? It turns out they sleep like 6 to 7 hours a night.
What's even more intriguing is that when Lieberman looked at graphs that showed the relationship between hours of sleep and death, the people that got 7 hours of sleep were always the least susceptible.
Basically, it turns out that 7 is, for most people, optimal.
Myth 2. Sitting is unhealthy. It turns out that hunters, who are arguably some of the most healthy humans in the world, sit around just as much as we do.
All animals sit, right? My dog sits, cows sit, chickens sit, every animal sits, and hunter-gatherers also sit.
However, the key difference is not how long we sit, but rather the way we sit.
If you get up every once in a while, right? Interrupted sitting is actually much more healthy than non-interrupted sitting for the same amount of time.
In the West, we sit for an average of 40 minutes at a time, whereas hunters only really sit for an average of 10 to 15 minutes.
It's like turning on the engine of your car. You're driving around the block. You're turning on all kinds of cellular mechanisms. You lower blood sugar levels. All kinds of genes get activated, and it turns out that is by far the most important way to sit. So just get up every once in a while.
Myth number 3: you need to get 10,000 steps a day. The idea of getting 10,000 steps a day was actually popularized right before the Tokyo Summer Olympics in 1964. Some people say that the manufacturer of the world's first step counter called it the Monpo meter, which means 10,000 steps counter in Japanese, while other people say it was because the Japanese character for 10,000 looks like a dude walking. However, what's most important is that there is actually no science behind the 10,000 steps number. So it's not bad to have a steps goal, but 10,000 steps isn't really the minimum that you absolutely have to achieve every single day. Myth number 4: you should reduce weightlifting as you get older in order to avoid injury. There are different types of physical activities, such as endurance training like running and strength training like lifting weights. However, each type of activity is responsible for slowing down a certain part of the aging process. That's why the grandparents in certain cultures that are still working, hunting, or gathering food can live longer and healthier lives. So as we age, exercise is the one superpower that we can use to lower our chance of death. Myth number 5: genetics play a huge role in how healthy we can actually be. While genetics can make you more vulnerable to diseases like diabetes or heart disease, Lieberman argues that environmental factors are more important.
Genes load the gun, and environment pulls the trigger, right?
Environment is something that we can actually control. So putting yourself in environments like a park or gym where you can engage in regular physical activity can significantly reduce the risk of various diseases and have a greater positive impact on your health regardless of your genetics.
Exercise isn't a magic bullet. It's not going to prevent you from getting those diseases completely, but it lowers your risk quite substantially.
However, one of the hardest parts is actually overcoming the instinct to limit yourself to the confines of a comfortable, convenient environment, like the soft, plump, and voluptuous $2,000 couch in front of your TV. Nowadays, our modern society is in a comfort crisis.
A world where we pay extra for comfort, and we'll prefer it. But now we also live in a world where we have to now go out of our way to be physically active because it's no longer necessary.
We have so many convenient environments that I honestly kind of admit to using quite frequently, like escalators, elevators, shopping carts, and cars.
50% of Americans ever exercise, ever. And only 20% meet those very minimal World Health Organization standards. We're a nation of couch potatoes.
Lieberman says that by training our instincts to become less comfortable, like taking the stairs instead of the elevator, biking instead of driving, or subscribing to this channel, our body becomes more physically active, which has magnificent health benefits. However, if you're currently not in the shape you want to be at this moment, there's no shame at all.
Furthermore, if you're unfit and you're not really, exercising isn't any fun, right? It's unpleasant. You sweat and you get hot and you get cranky and and it's not that rewarding until you get fit. And so people hate it, right? And then we blame them for being lazy, but they're actually just being normal. And I think we need to have more compassion towards people who struggle to exercise.
Lieberman also believes that we should be preventing diseases instead of medicating them. This even applies to one of the deadliest diseases in the world right now, cancer. Cancer is much more common in the Western world, and levels have only been rising. This is because there's actually a correlation between cancer and wealth.
Because cancer is basically natural selection gone awry in the body. It's when cells start competing with each other in ways that cause basically and start going multiplying and dividing out of control. Right? It's a kind of natural selection. And what is it that those cells are doing? They're competing for energy. And when you have more energy, like when you're eating more and being less physically active, you basically feed those cells.
High insulin, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone levels all increase the risk of cancers.
So if you look at most diseases, right, people are more physically active. They have lower levels of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. They have lower levels of insulin. They have lower levels of blood sugar. All of these depress cancer rates. And on average, people who are physically active have much lower rates of almost every single kind of cancer that you can think of.
Even though the thought of rising cancer rates is depressing, the good news is that you have the choice to start preventing diseases like cancer right now just by exercising and eating healthy food. And speaking of healthy food, what is sugar's role in these diseases?
The three things you should, if you really care about your health, don't smoke, right? That's kind of obvious. I think everybody knows that. Get some exercise. I don't think you need me to tell you that, right? And cut down on sugar, on foods that are high in sugar and low in fiber.
Eating high amounts of sugar can cause your insulin to spike. And as we've already learned, high levels of insulin is extremely carcinogenic.
It's astonishing. You pay more money for foods today that have less sugar added. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? Because it's so cheap.
Sugar is also a pro-inflammatory food, meaning it can cause systemic inflammation to your entire body. Exercise is what helps regulate these insulin levels and causes your muscles to produce interleukin-6, which has anti-inflammatory effects and helps turn down your body's immune system.
We never evolved to regulate inflammation because we never evolved to be physically inactive. Until recently, nobody was physically inactive until they were dying, right? So we never evolved an alternative mechanism to regulate our inflammation other than physical activity.
Myth number 6. Feet are not meant to be trained as a muscle group. I'm a person who has feet as flat as a ruler, so when my podiatrist told me that I had plantar fasciitis as a teenager and gave me these goofy looking insoles to wear, I was absolutely devastated and just fell to my knees and accepted my fate. However, what I didn't know was that this condition is actually preventable and treatable without an insole.
Quick example of what I call disevolution. It's what happens when you treat the symptoms of a mismatched disease rather than their causes or preventing their causes. So podiatrists are a bit like drug pushers in that sense, right? Because they're essentially putting your foot in a cast, right? And then for the rest of your life, you kind of have to keep using them unless you strengthen your feet. So there's nothing wrong with those, treating the symptoms. I mean, pain is no fun. So wear the insoles, right, to kind of, alleviate the pain, but also work on strengthening your foot. And I think you'll find that the plantar fasciitis will disappear and never come back.
So now that we know that strengthening the foot is the best form of prevention for pain when walking or running, how do we strengthen our feet? Firstly, there's a bunch of foot strengthening exercises that you can find online, like towel curls and grabbing a ball with your toes. Secondly, you can also wear barefoot shoes, which are special shoes that don't have stiff soles or arch supports. This causes your foot to strengthen as your muscles aren't relying on the comfy, bouncy soles that most modern shoes have. I actually bought these barefoot shoes on a specific e-commerce website owned by Jeff Bezos, and after wearing them for months, I haven't needed to wear insoles at all. However, there is one thing I need to warn you about before you go and instantly buy yourself a pair of these barefoot shoes. Although it might be logical to start using them 24/7 wherever you go, make sure to start out with small walking sessions here and there before gradually increasing your barefoot shoe endeavors.
If you suddenly decide to lift, huge weights that you can't lift before, you'll hurt yourself, right? The same thing as with your feet. So slowly it does it.
Myth number 7. You can never have too much muscle. Our ancestors had enough muscle mass to perform necessary tasks, but not enough to be excessive, and that's because
if you have more muscle than you need, you're basically adding to your cost of living, right?
So being physically fit and having strength is usually more beneficial for your health than being overly muscular. In fact, when doing physical tests on hunters and gatherers,
people are reasonably strong, but they're not super strong, and they're not buff and built and bulked and all that sort of stuff. They've got enough muscle to do what they need to do, but no more.
However, if that's the case, then why is there a stereotype that women are more attractive to guys with big, bulky muscles?
We pair bond as a species, and we have been for millions of years probably. you want to pair bond with somebody who's going to, because we also have cooperation and food sharing, right? You want to pair bond with somebody who's going to be able to, bring home the bacon, literally and figuratively, right? But bringing home the bacon does not mean looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, at least back in the day. Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day, right? Bringing home the bacon back in the day meant being a persistence hunter, being able to run long distances and being moderately strong. So they look more like a marathoner or a football player than they did a weightlifter.
Therefore, biologically speaking, a bodybuilder with overly huge muscles would not be as attractive as a lean, agile marathoner, because not only would they not be able to hunt for food, but also would consume more resources to maintain the comically large boulders on their shoulders. Myth number 8. Running is bad for your knees. Although knee injuries are most common in running, the idea that running causes arthritis or cartilage damage is not actually true.
If you have arthritis, running is excruciating and problematic. But if you don't have it, running actually, if anything, may be slightly preventive.
You would think that running would eventually wear down the joints, like how a car will wear down its tires. However, exercise actually promotes repair mechanisms in cartilage joints and other tissues. But there may be one other factor that is negatively impacting your running.
If humans have been running for millions of years, most of the time we were running barefoot. So we're kind of curious, how did people run before shoes? And what we learned was that today shoes have these cushioned heels that enable you to essentially run the way you walk, right? You land on your heel.
Running with a cushioned heel in modern shoes causes more strain on the joints. On the flip side, although barefoot runners do occasionally land on their heel, more often they do something called a forefoot or midfoot strike.
People who are barefoot more often than not, land on the ball of their foot and then let their heel down. When you do that, you actually prevent your foot from crashing into the ground, causing what's called an impact peak, a collisional force.
Because you aren't slamming your heel into the ground with every single step, there's less force impacting your knee, making the forefoot and midfoot striking technique the most healthy, optimal, and biologically correct way of running. However, just like barefoot shoes, switching to this striking technique requires gradual transition to avoid injuries.
Your calf muscles and your Achilles have to do now a lot more work to let your heel down. And so people who switch from heel striking to forefoot striking often have Achilles tendon problems, they get calf muscle problems, they don't do it properly, they'll get, their foot muscles aren't strong enough, they'll get all kinds of foot problems, right? So you can't just suddenly become a barefoot runner and start forefoot striking. If you're going to switch, you have to switch gradually and slowly and build up strength and learn to do it properly. Another thing people do is they tend to run like a ballerina, high up on their toes. That's really hard on your ankles and your calves. So you got to do it properly, but it can have enormous benefits.
Some other tips for using a proper running technique include using a high stride rate of around 180 steps a minute and making shorter strides to prevent bigger forces from impacting your knee.
And so a good runner lands with their shank, with their tibia vertical, so their ankle is below their knee. When you do that, pretty much everything will work out properly.
Myth number 9. The best exercise has to be something in the gym.
The best exercise is the one you like doing.
As long as you have a good mixture of low and high intensity workouts, along with strength training and cardio, if what you're doing is actually enjoyable, then that's the perfect exercise for you.
We never evolved to do one thing, and our bodies are too complex to benefit from just one thing. Mixing it up is the obvious way to go, right?
For me, the thought of repetitively lifting weights for a number of reps or sets is kind of boring and unenjoyable. So instead, I've been staying in shape by rock climbing with my friends, which has been a physically active, stress-relieving, and surprisingly social event that I look forward to every single week.
The more I study it, the more I think it's social. The more I think that, again, I think people are physically active, i.e. in our modern world, exercise, for two reasons: when it's necessary or rewarding. And what makes it rewarding for most people is the social aspect.
Now, if you don't have any friends like me in the 9th grade, you can always create an accountability contract with a family member or even hire a personal trainer to motivate you to work out with a social aspect. Myth number 10. Physical activity will help you lose weight fast.
Physical activity can help you lose weight, but it's not going to help you lose a lot of weight fast and not at the low doses that often are prescribed.
However, there is one benefit that you might not know of.
Physical activity is really important for helping people prevent themselves from gaining weight, or after a diet from regaining weight.
The way researchers found this out was by conducting a study on the biggest consumers of donuts, the Boston police. So basically, the Boston University put a bunch of policemen on a very severe diet.
Policemen all lost weight. Some of the policemen had to diet and exercise, some just dieted alone.
Obviously, the policemen who exercised and dieted at the same time lost the most amount of weight. However, the researchers continued tracking the policemen months after this study, and what they discovered is shocking.
The policemen who kept exercising, even after the diet was over and they went back to eating whatever the hell they wanted, donuts, whatever, they're the ones who kept the weight off. But the ones who didn't exercise, the weight came crashing back.
That's why physical activity is essential for preventing weight gain or weight regain.
Diet is, of course, the bedrock for weight loss, but exercise also plays an important role and should be part of the mix.
Obviously, this is way easier said than done. My most unhealthiest point in life was during a certain global pandemic that put every single household in lockdown. Since I was stuck at home, I lost complete motivation and let my health and fitness goals all slip away. So for someone who is in the same situation I was in right now, now, how can we start becoming healthier?
We have to figure out ways to help people without shaming them and without blaming them and without bragging and whatever, talking about the marathon they ran or this, that, or the other. Make them feel less uncomfortable about the topic. Anything is better than nothing. And if you can get started on that pathway, then it'll eventually become self-rewarding.
And even if you are fit and listening to this video, you can always help out a friend too.
We need as a society to help those folks rather than judge them.
That's the entire 1 hour and 29-minute podcast explained in 15 minutes. If you want to take care of your health, subscribe and unlock an entire vault filled with valuable treasures of knowledge, like this gem on how to perfect your sleep. Thank you for visiting the vault, and we hope you come back soon.